You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 24th of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up. Five people are killed and more than 20 are injured in an attack on the headquarters of a Turkish defence firm. We'll bring you up to date on the latest from Ankara as Turkey launches retaliatory strikes on the PKK. Also coming up, evidence of North Korean troops operating in Russia. The US says it shows Moscow's desperation. The Kremlin and Pyongyang deny everything. Our Tokyo Bureau Chief, Fiona Wilson, will join me to outline the city's metro making a debut on the stock exchange, and our design editor and Paris Bureau Chief will be here to look at the latest edition of Monocle magazine. Plus a new show debuts on Monocle Radio.
We think of our reader and we're always thinking about showing them things that they can actually go out and buy when they flip the pages of the magazine.
Natalie Theodosi will bring us more on Monocle on fashion a little later. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in today's news. Workers at Boeing have rejected a new offer of a 35% pay rise in return for ending their strike. The United States has finalised a $20 billion portion of a $50 billion loan promised to Ukraine, and Israel has launched strikes on targets in Syria. The Syrian Defence Ministry said the strikes targeted neighbourhoods in Damascus and in the Homs countryside. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, let's begin today's programme with an update on the attack on the headquarters of Turkey's aerospace industries in Ankara. The death toll is now 5, the number of injured about 20. Overnight, Turkey's government said its military struck sites in Iraq and Syria linked to the Kurdish militant group, the PKK, who Turkey is blaming for the attack. Well, I'm joined now by Victoria Craig, a journalist in Ankara. A very good morning to you, Victoria.
Hi, good morning, Emma.
Just to explain, so could you bring us an update, please, on the situation?
Yeah, so as you say, 5 dead, and that includes employees of the Turkish aerospace industries facility, including an engineer, a security guard, as well as a taxi driver, 22 injured, which also included security forces, according to the government. And the government also says 2 have been neutralized. State media have reported that it was the taxi driver was killed by the 2 people who carried out the attack on that facility yesterday morning. And the Justice Ministry has begun an investigation. The Interior Minister, meanwhile, last night said that the attack targeted the successes of Turkey's defense industry. And in his strong opinion, it was the PKK, as you said, the Kurdish separatist terror group responsible for the attack. The PKK, for its part, has not said anything this morning or last night as these, I suppose, government allegations have swirled. And as you reported, the Turkish forces have hit 32 PKK targets with airstrikes in the mountains of northern Iraq and northern Syria in response to yesterday's terror attack. And that response has killed members of the PKK. The Defense Ministry, meanwhile, says that operations are, quote, continuing decisively.
Indeed. Tell us a little bit more about what its military operations are against the PKK. The strikes, the targets have been in Iraq and Syria, linked to the Kurdish militant group.
Yeah, exactly. According to the government, they've hit so-called military intelligence, energy infrastructure facilities, as well as logistics hubs and ammunitions depots in that region. And they say that they're going to continue the operations against the PKK and the YPG. It's also another terror group here. They say without interruption until the planned objectives are achieved. So this is a fairly common response, if you can call it common, been two incidents like this in Turkey. If you'll recall, about a year ago, we saw an attack on the Interior Ministry here in the center of Ankara. It was a similar sort of situation where a suicide bomb was launched outside the gates of the ministry. Two people who carried out that attack were killed. They were members of the PKK, and Turkey responded with similar airstrikes after that, along with a slew of arrests.
Now, the PKK is listed as a terrorist organisation by the US, the EU, and also the UK. Just explain to us the nature of this continued struggle between Turkey and the Kurdish fighters. There was a ceasefire, but it ended in 2015. And as you say, there have been flare-ups, but this seems to be quite a significant attack. What difference does this now make?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, this conflict between the PKK and the Turkish government has been going on for about 40 years or so. And this terror group, as you say, they want an independent Kurdish state, and it's clearly at odds with the Turkish government. More broadly, Kurds have been really marginalized in Turkish society and by the Erdogan government. The pro-Kurdish party, which is not the PKK, is the third biggest here in Turkey, and it's under constant threat of being shut down. Its leader is in jail despite the European Court of Human Rights calling for his release. Frequently, when this party wins elections, the government will appoint its own administrators, so it doesn't really recognize those leaders in those areas. And there's been ongoing fighting, as I say, for the last 40 years or so, particularly in the southeast part of the country. So, this is an ongoing very serious issue. And there had been a thought that potentially there could be peace talks with the PKK and the government. The attack yesterday came just a day after the Nationalist Movement Party, which is one of the biggest allies of the Erdogan government, said in a speech that the leader of the PKK, who is also in jail, could be allowed to speak in parliament if he declares the end of terrorism. But obviously we saw then the attack on this critical and huge facility in the capital. So, if you sort of think about that potentially being the PKK's response to the thought or the specter of peace talks, it doesn't look like that's on the cards, at least for now.
No, because this manufacturer, TUSAS, it's Turkey's largest aerospace manufacturer, isn't it? And it produces, it's owned by the Turkish Armed Forces Foundation and the government. More than 10,000 people are employed there. The significance of it, of the PKK being able to target such a huge symbol, dare we say it, of Turkey's military power.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what the Interior Minister said last night. I think it was a press conference at the hospital where a number of employees from that facility had gone and security forces who had been injured. At a press conference last night, he said the attack targeted the successes of Turkey's defense industry. I think those were thoughts also echoed by the president in a statement that he released, very strongly worded statements from government ministers across the board. As you say, the TUSAS, which is the Turkish aerospace industry's facility, is a state-owned company. It makes not just military and civilian planes and it makes not just military but also civilian planes and helicopters. And it really began as a way for Turkey to focus on reducing its reliance on foreign-made imports of this kind of technology. As you say, a huge facility that employs about 15,000 people. It's huge in terms of square footage, located just on the outskirts of Ankara, about 17 kilometers away from the city center. And it's also the licensed maker of American-designed F-16 fighter jets, which are crucial to Turkey's military operations as a key NATO ally and, one of the biggest militaries in NATO. So just from that, you can sort of see the scale of the importance of this facility. And if you think about, a terror group that is constantly at odds with the Turkish government, you can sort of see why they might pick that as a target.
And how does it affect your daily life in Ankara?
Hugely. I'm trying to remember the timeline. I think about 2 hours or so after we got the initial reports of the attack on that facility, it was becoming much more difficult to access social media platforms, X, where a lot of ministers had been, the interior minister especially, that was his first destination to communicate to the public that there had been an attack. That's when he called it a terror attack. And so we really rely on that platform, especially not just journalists like me, but also members of the public to receive information. And the Turkish public especially relies less on traditional forms of media, TV and radio. They watch YouTube quite frequently as a news source. And so as there were more pictures of, leaked CCTV footage coming out of that facility, and speculation really started to ramp up about what had happened, who was responsible, who the individuals were who carried out the attack, the government really throttled access to the internet. Even Google was difficult to access at one point. So it's been really difficult to have access to information. That has sort of lessened this morning. I've been able to get on Twitter and search on Google and all that. So it seems to be less now.
In the meantime, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is out of town. He's at the BRICS meeting in Russia. What difference does that make?
Yeah, when the attack happened, we were all sort of looking for some kind of statement from the president. It first came from the interior minister, and I think it was several hours after the attack happened that the president got in front of cameras after, I think it was a joint meeting in Russia for the BRICS summit, and said very few words, but acknowledged what had happened. It's made, I suppose, I'm not sure it's made a huge difference really, because there was an immediate response. Security services and personnel were on the scene very quickly. There was a huge line of ambulances, fire trucks, like I said, security teams who were there as well, trying to make sure that the people inside the facility were safe and that they could contain the situation. So I'm not sure what sort of role he played. Clearly, the BRICS summit was something that had been scheduled much more in advance. He had no way of knowing that this attack was going to happen. But members of the defense community also, who were in Istanbul for a summit of new technology, the unveiling of new technology and conversations there, were making their way back to Ankara and that facility last night as well. So lots of people out of town yesterday when this attack happened. That's for sure.
Briefly, internationally, the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has condemned the attack and said that the military alliance will stand with its ally. Turkey has a complicated relationship with NATO, but what is it that NATO could do to help?
That's a good question. I haven't seen any specific reports about what NATO may be planning to do, but I think when it comes to these sorts of situations, words really go a long way, and getting support from the NATO Secretary General, as well as many of Turkey's big NATO allies, including the United States, saying unequivocally that the United States and other members, Germany's foreign minister or president has also made similar remarks. Many of its NATO allies have said that it stands unequivocally with Turkey and will offer support. And I think in these kinds of situations, those words go a long way to hopefully at least showing solidarity and potentially deterring future attacks.
Victoria Craig in Ankara, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. 9:12 a.m. in Moscow, 7:12 a.m. here in London. Now, an estimated 3,000 North Korean troops have been sent to help Russia in its war against Ukraine. South Korea has also warned that Pyongyang is planning to send thousands more. Well, I'm joined now by Mark Galeotti, who's political analyst and author of Putin's Wars from Chechnya to Ukraine, and also by Ramon Pacheco Pardo, who's regional envoy for East and Southeast Asia and Professor of International Relations at King's College London. A very good morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
Welcome back to Monocle Radio, Ramon. Let's begin with you. North Korea gets to experience a real war.
Yes, and I think this is a major benefit that North Korea is going to obtain from sending troops to Russia, whether it's on the rear or on the front line. North Korean troops are going to be able to witness how a war is fought firsthand. Of course, we know that Russia is also using North Korean artillery shells, missiles as well. So it's going to be able to observe how they actually work in practice, and not only during training practices that they can do back in North Korea itself.
And let's bring in Mark now. There have been rumours swirling around for a good couple of weeks now that the North Koreans were doing this. The US now says it has evidence. What's changed?
Well, I mean, I think it's clear that there is some kind of North Korean presence. But what's interesting is even the Americans, even while they're confirming this, they still don't, or at least they're not admitting to knowing actually what the North Koreans will be doing. And certainly if you look at the Russian media, they're still talking more about North Korean forces essentially being used for rear area security to free up Russian troops for the front line. So, what's changed is a slow firming up of the intelligence picture, but there are still large sort of holes and uncertainties within it.
The South, Ramon, have been being very quick to warn the rest of the world about what could be happening here, because this alliance now, this very obvious alliance between North Korea and Russia, what does it mean for the neighbours?
It is a huge concern for South Korea, as you can imagine. I just came back from there last week, and this was the main talk in town. What does this mean for the future of inter-Korean relations when Russia, we assume, will continue to support North Korea, at the very least, as long as Putin is in power. And this includes technology transfers, the intelligence transfers, economic support. Now Russia becoming the major benefactor of North Korea. So if there were going to be not necessarily a war between the two Koreas, but an escalation of hostilities between both of them, then we would see Russia supporting the North, and we would see that nothing would happen, of course, in the UN Security Council to condemn North Korea. And we also have to remember that there is also a cybersecurity cooperation between the two countries, and South Korea, like other countries such as Japan, for example, the US, is constantly suffering cyber attacks from North Korea. Now we assume with the support of Russia as well.
And Mark, just the reaction from the United States. Lloyd Austin said this was a major escalation. I mean, how much of an alarming step is this for the United States, and indeed for those who look at Russia and wonder where it could go next?
I mean, I think one has to sort of draw a line between people who are trying to map out where this could go. And Lloyd Austin said it could if the North Koreans become actually involved in hostilities, and actually the impact on the ground. I mean, the most extreme reports we've had are of 12,000 North Korean troops. That sounds dramatic. That's equivalent to about 2 weeks at most of Russia's casualties in this current conflict. So it's not the kind of thing that in any case is going to actually tilt the balance of the war. It is more about this sense of the slow outward spread. But even that, I mean, is in some ways a little bit disingenuous, given the degree to which, yes, we do not have, for example, NATO combat troops deployed to Ukraine, and there's no prospect of that. But the level of support for Ukraine has been extreme. So, I mean, I think it is more about trying to draw lines and more or less tell the Russians and indeed the North Koreans that actually if they cross those lines, then the West will consider some kind of response, rather than because it actually thinks that there's some kind of catastrophic World War III in the offing.
Ramon, is there a sense that we don't know a great deal about what happens in North Korea, but is there a sense that having engaged in this firm pact a few months ago, North Korea and Russia will now see a more permanent state of affairs where Russia, when it runs out of its own soldiers, can literally ring up Pyongyang and say, send more?
I think so. I think because North Korea understands the long-term benefits, again, as long as Putin is in office, that it can obtain from supporting the invasion of Ukraine. I think it would be willing to scale up the support as Russia needs, especially because there's no indication that there's going to be a major conflict between the two Koreas, because they're having some discussions. Why would North Korea send soldiers to Russia if there may be a confrontation in the Korean Peninsula? I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon. So North Korea can actually free up its resources, including manpower, as we are seeing now, to support Russia. And it would expect a major support from Russia in the future, including potentially technology transfers that would really help North Korea to develop its nuclear and missile programs, which so far, it has to be said, Russian support has helped, but it hasn't been as major as the indigenous capabilities that North Korea has been able to develop, and to an extent the support it has received from China in the past.
And staying with you, Ramon, just explain a little bit about what these capabilities are. Do we know exactly how skilled these fighters are?
We don't. We don't know. We know they train regularly. They have to because technically, obviously, North Korea is still in a state of war. But we don't know how skilled they are in the battlefield. They haven't been tested in the battlefield. In decades past, North Korea did deploy soldiers, for example, to independence wars in Africa. And they were considered to be quite skilled, well-equipped, disciplined, but this was many decades ago. So we don't know if this is still the case today.
Mark, let's move to the wider picture about what this now means for the rest of the world. The sense is that what's happening between Pyongyang and Moscow is an alliance not just to help Moscow defeat Ukraine, but also to create a bigger alliance that could unite against the United States.
Yeah, but we have to keep this in context. I mean, we saw this also with the current BRICS summit that's currently taking place in Kazan in Russia. It's easy enough to gather together countries which have some kind of beef with the current global order and who would like to see aspects of it changed or eliminated. That doesn't mean to say, though, they're actually true allies. I mean, even if one looks at the relationship between Russia and North Korea, neither side is doing this out of the goodness of their hearts and their love of their neighbor. It is a very, very transactional relationship in which, in effect, North Korea is being paid for its soldiers. So, likewise, yes, we can create these so-called crinks, for example, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, sort of blocks. But if one actually looks at it, these are very limited. Most of these sort of pariah nations would, frankly, just rather be grandfathered into the sort of the fraternity of nations rather than actually want to see all the structures destroyed. So yes, we do see a whole variety of connections between countries that actually have some reasons to feel uncomfortable about the current sort of global order. But we shouldn't assume that this is becoming some kind of James Bond villain-like alliance of subversive powers.
Mark Galeotti, thank you so much for joining us on the line. And thanks also to Ramon Pacheco Pardo, Regional Envoy for East and South East Asia and Professor of International Relations at King's College London. You're listening to The Globalist, still to come.
We think of our reader and we're always thinking about showing them things that they can actually go out and buy when they flip the pages of the magazine.
Natalie Theodosi tells us what's in store for our new radio programme, Monocle on Fashion.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, Vincent McAviney, political journalist, Monocle Radio regular, producing and presenting on the programme today. Congratulations, Vincent.
Hashtag hustle.
How's the head?
It's all right.
You're right, busy in there. OK, you've taken the time out from keeping us on air to taking a look at the papers. Thank you for doing the heavy lifting. What have you spotted this morning?
That's quite all right. Well, something we're going to be reading about, I think, in the lot in the papers in the next week is the Commonwealth Summit taking place all the way in Samoa, which King Charles is on his way to after that tour of Australia, and Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer is attending as well. Now, there was a lot of talk during the Brexit years here in Britain that Brexit was an opportunity for us to reconnect with the Commonwealth, but many nations in the Commonwealth, it seems, unhappy increasingly with Britain. We think a key thing of a key part of discussion is going to be a lot of talk about reparations and apologies for slavery. And this is an absolute minefield, both for the monarchy and for the British government as well. Now, Keir Starmer's position is pretty unequivocal. He is saying that it's about looking forward, facing the challenges of the today, looking at things particularly like climate change, which quite a few of the 55 or so, I think, Commonwealth nations are quite affected by, and it's about facing up to those challenges. He's saying, yes, slavery is abhorrent, but it's about looking to the future. But CARICOM, for instance, which is a group of 15 Caribbean countries, has indicated it's going to push really hard on this, particularly UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy, who previously is a backbencher. I'm quite surprised he did this because he was always in line if Labour got back into power for a top job. He is Foreign Secretary now. Back in 2018 on the backbenches, he called for reparations to be paid to Caribbean nations. So I think it's going to be slightly awkward.
It will be, not least because at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, CHOGM, it is not officially on the agenda. But, well, Downing Street says that the reparations chat is not on the agenda. However, the Commonwealth Heads of Government have issued a communique, I think the BBC seeing it, saying heads noting calls for discussions on reparatory justice with regards to the transatlantic trade in slavery. They are determined to literally sort of like put this problem at the British government's door.
Yeah, and you're about to get a changeover as well of the Secretary-General of the organisation, Baroness Scotland, who has been in that position for 8 years. She is to be replaced, and it seems all the sort of main contenders are somewhat in favour of reparations. What Britain is trying to do, it's set up what it says is a special trade centre within Whitehall, within the Foreign Office, intending to boost economic ties in the Commonwealth, particularly with 6 members: Bangladesh, Guyana, India, Mozambique, Rwanda and Uganda. They're sort of projected to be the 10 fastest growing economies in the world by 2027. And the combined GDP of the Commonwealth is expected to exceed 19.5 trillion in the next 3 years. This is a significant block if you can really boost these ties, but it's going to be pretty awkward for the sort of British contingent that is there when everyone else is wanting to talk about reparations, and they're simply going to be saying that's not a conversation that we're willing to have.
It does seem to be a bit of a soft power problem. Let's move to the increasingly vitriolic language being used in the run-up to the US elections. We've known that from day one, Trump doesn't pull his punches. However, up until now, Kamala Harris has been pushing the narrative of joy, of not going back, positivity. Less than 14 days to go when we have the presidential election. She's now calling Trump a fascist. He's come back in the last few hours saying that her mind is warped. It's just the gloves are off now.
The gloves are off, and earlier this week he accused her of drinking and having a drug habit with absolutely no evidence at all. It is, just throwing everything about it, and it is because we are in this sort of fully down the post-truth rabbit hole here. But it was an interesting town hall for Kamala Harris. She, I think, would have obviously preferred to have another presidential debate. She hands down won the last one, and she did well in that format. She slightly struggled in this format. Yes, the language, top line, the language changed. Anderson Cooper said if she agreed with him that Donald Trump is met the definition of a fascist, and she said, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And that is something that she wanted to return to in her answers, talking about the fact that the generals who we know, have been coming out, and John Kelly this week sort of saying that he is, this huge threat, that he is fascist. His commentary around wanting generals, he said himself, like Hitler's who did his work, well known his adoration of sort of strong men, dictators around the world. But this is a sort of a step change from her to, in this final furlough when the polls are so tight, it is the Project Fear. And we know in past, moments, looking back even, 10 years ago to the Scottish referendum, the British government's position was to run Project Fear, that they thought would drive people out. Look, you might not agree with her on everything, but at the end of the day, it's the whole game here because of that. But what I think she struggled with in this town hall debate is she had been a bit sharper, particularly in that interview last week with Fox News, in other media appearances, in her answers. She had been accused previously of having a bit of word salad. She did go round the houses a little bit in her answers. She was asked about anti-Semitism on college campuses. She gave a sort of circular 5-minute answer and returned to attacking Trump again for what he would do with Israel and the Middle East situation. And she is still in some ways having to introduce herself. People still don't really know her full biography. I was sort of caught the other day, I was sort of reading something about her, And I realised, I had no idea if her father was still alive or not, or a relationship there. She talks a lot about her mother. And it turns out he is. There's a few interesting pieces. She's completely quite well estranged from her father. He's a very famous economics professor. But, things like that, sort of fundamental things about her, I think America is still trying to discover.
Indeed, there's an excellent article in the New York Times about the assessment of Kamala Harris's performance, and word salad was not there, but it should have been, because that's a fantastic expression as to what the New York Times thought of Harris's performance at the CNN town hall. So as Harris is trying to sort of pivot back to her main narrative, to try to introduce herself and to try to keep people's attention, in the meantime, Trump and his entourage and his very wealthy, noisy friends are really doing well when it comes to hogging the headlines.
Yeah, that is right. We've got a sort of double bill of tech billionaires in the papers today. So first of all, Elon Musk has, it seems, been warned by the Department of Justice that his daily now $1 million giveaways to those who sign up to his petition could potentially be breaking election laws. This is something that has generated a lot of headlines, a lot of publicity. But, they're trying to argue that what they're doing isn't sort of encouraging or paying people to go and vote. It's getting them to sign this petition in support of the First and Second Amendment. I mean, we're sort of dancing on the head of a pin here. But I think in Elon Musk's mind, he truly believes that Donald Trump is going to win. And he thinks if he does, well, he'll shut this down and I can get a pardon from him anyway, so it doesn't matter. And it's playing fast and loose. And we are having these, what are effect czars, sort of oligarchs, American oligarchs sort of coming in and flaunting their power. At the same time, in LA, this is a really interesting piece about press freedom. You've got the Los Angeles Times, which is owned now by Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong, another California tech entrepreneur billionaire, and he has stopped the paper, which doing their normal thing of having the editorial board endorsing a candidate. He's instead told them, that they can run a piece which lays out completely factually the positive and negatives of each candidate, but they cannot endorse in the presidential race, even though in recent local elections in California, this is something they've done. He is stepping in, likely because he fears any kind of reprisal from a unchained second Trump term.
Finally, Vinny, let's talk about what's happening in the United Kingdom in terms of what people are being asked for in terms of their opinion. In a couple of days ago, I don't know if you've been checking the website, which people are being asked to offer their views on what should be done to help the NHS.
Yes.
It's really good fun.
Yes.
People want special things.
Yeah, and I keep thinking about the meeting where someone said, maybe we shouldn't publish this live. We should wait and, kind of go through the answers, cipher them, filter them down.
It's a 10-minute insight into the mind of a Brit. That's all we can say. And I urge you all to go and have a look. I think they've sort of washed it a bit, but it was quite fun when it first started off. So we're all being asked about what to do with the NHS. We're now being asked about what the inside of our HS2, our high-speed rail 2 trains should look and feel like. Now, these trains are being built by Hitachi. As far as I can remember, the last time I sat on a Hitachi train, it was one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've ever had. It's like having dentist's chair lighting. And I don't know, interrogation chair. Luckily, never been in one, but it's not a nice experience. And now they're asking us, do you want that for our trains?
Yes, that is what they're asking. This is a Railway News story published in the last 24 hours, and it's about HS2, this big, much sort of in trouble train line that Labour are trying to fix, that was meant to go all the way to Scotland at one point and potentially out to Wales as well. It's now only going to Birmingham, might get an extra branch in the budget, which takes it to Manchester. But what they're doing is building mock-ups of the internal carriages and inviting people to come on board and to check them out, and sort of taking advice on, a handrail here would be helpful, or a USB port here would be great, or things like that. But people have given good feedback, which is, on a train, I want to be able to see my luggage, so they're raising the heights of the seats so that luggage can go underneath, and changing the way that the sort of luggage racks are. But I would agree with you in that I know that Hitachi has built trains recently in the UK. I think the recent Eurostar trains, had a hand in building, and also the West Coast mainline trains. And there is literally no padding on the seats. They are so uncomfortable, and the lighting is so bright. It's just such a... I know the sort of old stock of Eurostar trains needed a bit of an upgrade, but they were sort of a comfortable, sort of slightly luxury experience. And it's sort of gone to a very, budget airline type. So it'll be interesting to see what feedback people give on these trains. They're also, they've built a mock-up of the cafe car as well. So hopefully a bit of common sense might help with that design.
Vincent McAviney, let's take our cushions. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. The time here in London is 7:33 a.m. While Vinny goes back behind the glass to take control of the programme today, let's have a listen to the latest news headlines. Workers at Boeing have rejected a new offer of a 35% pay rise in return for ending their strike. Their union said almost 2/3 of its members voted to turn down the deal. More than 30,000 workers have been on strike since mid-September. The aircraft manufacturer estimates the action has led to losses of around $6 billion. The United States has finalised a $20 billion portion of a $50 billion loan promised to Ukraine. The money will be backed by frozen Russian assets. It's expected that the money will be made available to Kyiv by the end of the year. And Israel has launched strikes on targets in Syria. The Syrian Defence Ministry said the strikes targeted neighbourhoods in the city of Damascus and a military site in the Homs countryside. Israel has been carrying out strikes against Iranian-linked targets in Syria for years, but has ramped up its raids since last year's October the 7th attacks by Hamas. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. 7:35 here in London now. The November issue of Monocle magazine hits newsstands today. That's great news. And I'm joined now from Milan by Monocle's design editor Nick Moniz, and from the French capital by Simon Bouvier, who's Monocle's Paris bureau chief, to go through what is a design special. A very good morning to you, gentlemen. Good to have you.
Good morning, Emma Nelson.
Bonjour, Emma. Bonjour, Nick.
Bonjour, Simon. Right, Nick, let's begin with you.
Hello.
This is this glorious time of the year when you get your moment in the sun. You have design special written all over the front cover.
We do.
Better design for everyone. And I just briefly want to touch on the choice of cover. Because the lovely thing is that instead of a real chair, we have a beautiful plain illustration of a drawn, simple, upright backed chair and a pencil and a hand. It's a very, very delightful and pared back idea. What led us to that?
I mean, I think part of it was maybe wanting to, we've shifted our cover design in recent issues, and to have, I guess, something a bit more bold, a little bit more striking, a singular image. So, I mean, that's a design story in itself, Emma Nelson. But I think, truthfully, I think this one is our creative director, Richard Spencer Powell, wanting to design and mock up his own chair, and he's put it on the cover, maybe to see if there are any, I can't tell you why I'm in Milan, but I can't tell you that it's not because I'm not shopping this design around.
Okay, it's beautiful. Simon, we're going to talk about a little bit more about design in its more pure form in a moment with Nick. But the contribution that you've made to the major contribution that you've made to this edition is the focus on the Parisian bookshop and that idea that they are these wonderful havens from whatever is going on in the outside of the world. And, talking about the French capital being very, very good at designing bookshops, opening bookshops, having bookshops that are open for everybody and staying open as well.
Yeah, that's right. I think that a lot of people imagine that Paris's literary history is kind of the only explanation for the fact that there are many, many bookshops there. But in fact, the kind of thriving book economy in Paris and in France in general, I think, is the result of pretty deliberate policy design. So in the article, I go into the two kind of big policies that have allowed France to be the country that has the most independent bookstores per capita, 3,500 countrywide, and for Paris to continue having a thriving bookshop scene in spite of the fact that the booksellers there are under the same economic pressures that booksellers around the world are, which is thriving online retail. as well as skyrocketing commercial real estate prices.
And staying with you, Simon, it is the idea of designing a space which is a haven for people to go to. I mean, the number one location is Karl Lagerfeld's Set L, which is an absolute joy to go to. But the idea that within a big city you can actually create a space of quiet creativity.
Yeah, and also, once you create this policy framework that allows bookshops to stay open, really what characterizes the book economy here is its diversity. So you do have bookshops like Set L that are very kind of focused on design and fashion and this kind of elevated world of Karl Lagerfeld. But you also have antiquarian bookshops that sell artifacts that look like they're fresh off the printing press, but actually they weren't made on a printing press at all because they're from 1485. And you also have bookstores that sell exclusively the Franco-Belgian brand of comic strips called Bande Dessinée, which is a thriving industry in France because of its kind of cultural prominence. So, there really is a diversity of different types of bookstores here. It's not just chains. It's not just beach reads. It's really a system that has created this diverse book economy here.
This is a really useful little edition of Monocle, because not only do we tell you where to go to buy your books, we also tell you what to sit on while you're reading them, Nick. And there's this marvellous...
What a segue.
Isn't that clever? I thought it took me hours to think of that. The idea, though, is that you have made a hero out of a place where most of us collapse in our most private and unguarded moments. And there's this glorious expo in the latest edition, Nick, of people behaving very elegantly on their sofas.
Yeah, truly. And I don't know if it's just the caliber of people that we've got, because I think if you photograph me, I'd probably be my jocks. But everyone is clothed.
I don't think we need to see that, Nick. No. Thank you.
Everyone is clothed. Everyone looks incredibly elegant, and the pieces of furniture that they're sitting on are phenomenal. So the whole ambition and the whole idea behind this expo, this photo-led story, was to reach out to, I guess, key figures in the design world and talk to them a little bit about their sofa, what it means to them, their selection, why they picked it, are there sentimental things, how do they actually use it. So we've got everyone from the likes of Lisa Dimitrios, who is the granddaughter of Charles and Ray Eames, and she's sitting on this amazing Eames sofa that was produced in 1984 in her home just outside of San Francisco. And she tells this amazing story about how her grandparents almost used her mum and her siblings as case studies, testers for their furniture. And she tells us a little bit of the story behind this and how, when she was growing up, she would come home and there would be prototypes of Eames furniture. And ultimately, this was one that she's then gone on to sit on and keep and use in her own home. So we have amazing stories like that. Then there's people like Wael El-Awar, who's this brilliant Dubai-based architect. He won a Golden Lion at the Venice Biennale a couple of years ago. And he's talking about how, actually, I have no idea what this sofa is, who it's by. I found it at a Sunday market in Beirut. I think it's from the 1960s, maybe not. And I've just become incredibly sentimental because there's that kind of story behind it. So it's looking at, I guess, our relationship to furniture, how it shapes our homes, but also our personal relationships.
Indeed. Simon, let's touch on this briefly, because the Parisians especially are very big on a very big statement sofa. In fact, it may be the only thing that's in a small Parisian flat. How much do they sort of cherish a piece of furniture like a sofa as almost like the public but private exhibition of your soul, because that's often the only thing you can fit in a room?
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, Simon.
No, I was just going to say, it's funny that you say that, Emma, because one of the booksellers that I visited here while I was doing the reporting on this story, when I asked her, what's your favorite spot in the bookstore? She said, well, it's the corner over there with that green sofa, which I bought at a flea market. And then when I asked the movers to move it up to my 7th floor walk-up apartment, they refused. So I had to put it somewhere. She refused to get rid of it, so she put it in her bookshop. And now it's where most of the people who are in there and who want to flip through their next purchase elect to sit down for a little bit. So there is definitely a sentimental attachment, but also the price of real estate means that sometimes these couches, we have to find kind of alternative solutions for them to survive because there's not room for them.
Finally, Nick, what's inside the design editor of Monocle? What sofa does he have?
Well, I have a lovely made in Britain loaf sofa, but it doesn't mean that I haven't been inspired to want to look for something a little bit different. I mean, I think Marcio Kogan's own design, his Horizonte sofa for Minotti, is something that's jumping out at me. But what I was going to say, why I tried to jump in on Simon, is it was amazing how many of these designers talked about it being the singular sculptural piece in their living room. It's the sort of thing that sets the tone. So I think if you're finding something, that sounds like an impressive sofa that you can't even get it up to the top floor, 7th floor walk up. But it's this thing can really set the tone for our home, and I think that's perhaps my singular biggest takeaway from this.
Nick Monisse in Milan, Simon Bouvier in Paris. Thank you both for joining us on The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Join Monocle every weekday and let the briefing guide and inspire you through uncertain times, always keeping you ahead of the curve. Hear razor-sharp insights and opinion from Monocle's bureau and correspondents, as well as a lineup of brilliant minds from around the world.
It's devolving to a point where we're at odds with each other instead of letting our political leaders do the dirty work, so to speak.
Heavyweight coverage, no white noise, and always delivered with a smile.
I think the grey areas lead to a lot of sort of awkward conversations, and there's nothing the English dislike more than awkward conversations.
Keep your appointment with The Briefing every weekday at 1300 CET, noon in London and 7 a.m. in New York City, here on Monocle Radio.
Time to talk trade and economy with Vicky Price, economist and former joint head of the UK government's economic service. Welcome back. We've got you on the radio. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the BRICS meeting. We've talked about Recep Tayyip Erdogan being in Russia to join the BRICS meeting and not being there when the terrorist attack on Ankara took place. But the focus on BRICS and the priorities for the nations are what this year?
I think politically, of course, is to signpost the fact that Putin is still able to get so many countries to come to a meeting in Russia, despite whatever's happening in Ukraine. And I think that's been quite important for him. On the economic side is very much the issue of how can you have a group which can move away from the Western influence on the payment system in particular, but also, economically being considerably more united. So a lot of the focus in the last day or so has been on the possibility of de-dollarization, if you like, of global trade, which, of course, at present is dominated by the dollar. And when you look at all the any form of foreign exchange transactions, 89% of those involve the dollar somehow or other in trade. 54% of invoices are in dollars. So there is a big way to go. And indeed, there is also the question of foreign reserves. As you know, some of those foreign reserves of Russia have been frozen by the West. 58% of foreign reserves, in fact, are in dollars as well. So the question is, how do you get away from that? And I think that's one of the areas that they have been discussing, which has been getting prominence actually recently anyway.
And how successful do you think a play the BRICS will be able to make for this? I mean, what you've just laid out there is a very strong domination by the dollar.
Yes, but of course, there are the countries that are coming up. So the euro has been increasing in importance. The yen is still there. The won has increased. There is no doubt about that. Even the pound is being used. So the real question is whether there is going to be sufficient clout for the rest of those countries, which are, of course, now intending and have already applied and probably will become members of the BRICS, the initial BRICS. Which, of course, are, as we know, sort of Brazil and Russia and China and India and South Africa, to have even like a trade group, which is big enough to allow for those exchanges now to take place in a different way. There is a bit of a problem because, of course, many of them still trade with the West and really want to be part of the SWIFT payment system. But what you can do, and what has been discussed, is to have a sort of digital currency so that you use some blockchain technology, and you put a value on various digital tokens. They can be exchanged backed by local currencies, and those can then be used for exchange purposes. So you don't necessarily need to create anything particularly new or even sort of depend very much on China. You can actually use that type of currency to trade internationally. And of course, that's not beyond the bound of possibility, and that's being discussed, and that may well happen in the next few years. The only question is that there are now such a diverse group of countries there. You mentioned Turkey. Turkey, of course, with very close contacts with the West. I mean, one of the reasons one assumes that Turkey really wants to be involved in the BRICS is because its own membership with the EU, the negotiations that have been taking place seem to have stalled recently. But for Turkey, it will need to keep legs in both camps. So that's going to be a very important one. If you have countries that differ in terms of their enthusiasm to be part of the BRICS body, that's going to make life a little bit difficult in terms of moving ahead in a cohesive way.
Vicky Price, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. Now, the time here in London is 7:49 a.m. and anyone who bought shares in Tokyo Metro will have had a very good couple of days. The stalwart of the Japanese capital's transport system floated on the stock market. Its share price leapt almost immediately by 45%. Well, here to tell us more is Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asian Editor. Good afternoon, Fiona.
Hi, Emma. Don't you wish you'd put some money into Tokyo Metro yesterday?
I'm assuming that's what you did.
I didn't. Not a penny. Didn't find any change at the back of the sofa. Unfortunately, I didn't invest. But no, you're right. It rocketed pretty quickly.
Which is a shame because it's a massive deal for Tokyo and for its inhabitants and also for the Japanese stock exchange.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people feel, how could it go wrong, really? It's a huge utility, effectively, 9 lines. You've got 6.5 million passengers a day, 180 stations. And if you just look at the profits coming up in the coming fiscal year, they'll be up 13%. So I think a lot of people feel it was a pretty safe bet.
Why would they decide to float it? I mean, this is an enormous IPO. It's the largest, I think, in Japan since SoftBank in 2018.
Yeah, that's right. I think, if you look at the history of Tokyo Metro, well, it opened in 1920, but it's until yesterday, rather, it was owned 100%. It was split between the Tokyo Metropolitan Government, the city, and the central government. They've each sold half of their shares, so they still retain 50%. And the government is going to use its money, the money it raised, to pay back these huge debts from reconstruction efforts that have been, going on since the 2011 tsunami, earthquake, nuclear meltdown in 2011. So they're using it to pay back those debts.
And when you do privatise something, there is often a question raised by those who use the services about how much it will change for them. Is there any indication about whether your average Tokyo commuter is going to notice?
Well, I think, you have to remember that the railway system in Japan is very tightly regulated. It won't be possible for them to think, let's double the prices and make more money. They won't be able to do that. So it's a pretty good deal for customers. And I think for the small investors, loads of retail investors, they really, really tipped this towards them. They did TV ads, they went round houses, and they encourage people to invest in the system. So I think there'll be some very happy people in Tokyo today.
Indeed. Fiona Wilson, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Tokyo. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, coming soon to Monocle Radio is Monocle on Fashion. We have a brand new show for you. It covers the industry from the Monocle point of view, and it'll be hosted by our fashion director, Natalie Theodosi. The show will bring big interviews, breaking fashion news and special reports, and will take you behind the scenes everywhere from fashion weeks to trade fairs, and of course studios and ateliers old and new. Natalie caught up with our head of radio, Tom Edwards, to talk about the new programme, and she began by telling Tom what's in store for Monocle on Fashion.
Very exciting, yes. I think it's been a long time coming. It's something that we've both been talking about, so it's finally here. And I think it will reflect what we do in the magazine as well. We look at fashion from a business lens, so you'll get amazing insights from CEOs that are heading retail brands, some of the biggest brands in the world, the luxury groups. But at the same time, we take a very global perspective when it comes to fashion and all of our other coverage. So you will not only see and hear perspectives from designers of the big four fashion capitals, but we're going to look elsewhere all around the world for people that are doing things in an interesting way, that have unique points of view and that make things well, because something that we are very interested in is also the artisans and the manufacturers and the craftsmen.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Natalie. And I guess, what is it that characterises the way Monocle covers fashion? I guess in terms of style on the pages, it's about accessibility, right? It's about products that you and our readers and our listeners would actually buy and would add to their wardrobes and would buy for their vacations they've got planning. There's sort of an approachability, I suppose. The deep commitment to great quality and longevity would be another one. Maybe tell us a couple of the values that underpin what Monocle means when we talk about great fashion.
I think you got it right, Tom. There is a lot more functionality and practicality in mind when we choose the brands that we feature, when our stylists do shoots. We think of our reader, and we're always thinking about showing them things that they can actually go out and buy when they flip the pages of the magazine. And I think this is also why people do actually still shop when they look at our magazine and tear out pages, take them to shops and request those specific products, which is, I think, rare these days, given kind of this conversation around print and digital media and how everything is evolving. So we will have the same ethos on radio. And another thing that we do also in the magazine and something that Monocle has always done is, even if we're not talking to a trade audience, I think we have an audience of entrepreneurs and founders and business people that are really interested in what's going on in the industry and the behind the scenes. So we're going to bring a lot of that to life as well.
Speaking of the content then, and content is always king, right? What kinds of talents are we going to hear from, Natalie? Because I know you get to meet so many fascinating characters. Give us a little bit of a sense of some of the insights we're going to be gleaning once Monocle on Fashion is up and running.
So we've got some very interesting designers that we're going to be speaking to, from milliners to big names that have worked everywhere from couture to jewelry to more accessible fashion. So again, that real mix. And we're also going to be speaking to one of the most wanted on-demand man in the luxury industry at the moment, the CEO of Mytheresa, Michael Kliger, and following the news of their acquisition of Net-a-Porter, which is one of their biggest competitors. I'm so excited to get to sit down with him and quiz him about all of that, the evolution of the e-commerce landscape, and also how they have managed to weather the storm, to keep growing and to host some of the most amazing events, meet their customers offline, and then retain customer loyalty. So I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And he hasn't given many interviews yet, so it's going to be very interesting to get a first glimpse. And then we're also going to have some drinks with them for here in Paris to celebrate the launch.
Super exciting. And just a final note, I guess on tone, Natalie, because as you said, we're going to cover all the options, right? B2B, B2C, big hitters, deep insights. We'll have your smarts brought to bear in terms of looking at trends and themes in the sector. I guess another thing that's important is we'll have some fun, right? And this is another kind of Monocle characteristic, correct? We also want people to crack a smile. We know that it's a hugely important sector. We're passionate and serious about how we cover fashion, how we talk about luxury, premium brands. But we need to have some fun as well, right?
Absolutely. I think we want to have this kind of chats between us, with all the editors around Midori House and in our bureaus. And to just, this is an industry which is serious. There's a lot of interesting conversations we can have, but also it's worth poking fun of it a little bit and not taking it as seriously, and just having a laugh, and also having a laugh at ourselves as well, and everything that goes on behind the scenes when we're trying to put these stories together. So it will be a really nice mix.
Natalie Theodosi there in conversation with Tom Edwards, and you can listen to the first episode of Monocle on Fashion from tomorrow. And that's all the time we have for today's programme, though. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to our producers, Vincent McAviney, Laura Kramer and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Sana Jumani, and our studio manager, Flynn Simons, with editing assistance from Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. I'll be back with a briefing live at midday here in London. The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you very much for listening.